Hey there, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking an absolute revolution in behavioral science. For decades, standard economic theory held on to this really flattering, almost robotic view of us. The idea that humans are these perfectly rational, calculating machines, constantly maximizing our utility. But then came two brilliant psychologists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. Their historic partnership pretty much demolished that idea. Through rigorous experiments, they proved that we are definitively not the purely logical beings we like to think we are. Okay, let's dive right into this.
So I want you to be totally honest with yourself for a second. Are you really as rational as you think you are? Whether you're buying a car, picking a career, evaluating a stock, or, just doing your weekly grocery shopping, it always feels like you're firmly in the driver's seat, right? Well, the fascinating truth we're going to explore today is that your brain is actually running on a highly active, surprisingly emotional, and often deeply irrational autopilot.
Daniel Kahneman actually hit the nail on the head in his seminal book, Thinking Fast and Slow. He wrote, "The world makes much less sense than you think. The coherence comes mostly from the way your mind works. That feeling you have of making calculated, perfectly rational decisions, it's quite often an illusion. The world itself is chaotic, and the feeling that things just make sense is actually a coherent story generated by your own hidden cognitive mechanics. Basically, your brain is working overtime behind the scenes to smooth things out for you." Act 1. Meet the dualists. To really grasp why we behave the way we do and why we make the mistakes we make, imagine an invisible fight club happening right inside your head between two very distinct characters, constantly fighting for control. Kahneman famously named these two fighters System 1 and System 2, and they couldn't be more different. System 1 is your automatic associative machine. It operates instantly, completely unconsciously, and it's driven entirely by emotion, intuition, and patterns. It works effortlessly, like when you casually read a billboard on the highway or instantly flinch at a loud noise. System 2, on the other hand, is your conscious, reasoning self. It's slow, deliberate, and extremely logical. It requires deep, tiring focus. You're using System 2 when you're trying to parallel park in a really tight space or crunching numbers for your taxes. Now, think about this. We make roughly 35,000 decisions every single day. You probably identify really closely with that conscious, thoughtful System 2. But amazingly, System 1 handles about 96% of that daily workload. Why the huge imbalance? Well, because System 2 is notoriously what Kahneman calls a lazy controller. It costs precious mental energy to use System 2, so it happily just steps back, defaults to low-effort mode, and essentially rubber stamps whatever impulses and impressions System 1 throws its way. For example, look at the widened eyes on the left here. Your System 1 instantly registers fear or alarm, and then with the narrowed eyes on the right, it immediately senses suspicion or aggression. This processing happens in milliseconds, completely without your permission. It generates a vivid emotional impression long before your lazy System 2 even wakes up to analyze what you're actually looking at. Act 2, the glitches. Because our System 2 is so incredibly lazy, and because System 1 is stuck handling thousands of rapid-fire choices every day, it relies heavily on mental shortcuts. In behavioral science, we call these shortcuts heuristics. They're great for quick survival, but in our complex modern world, they create completely predictable glitches, which we know as cognitive biases. Take the availability heuristic. We judge how likely something is based on what's easy to remember. That's exactly why breathless media coverage of a plane crash makes us terrified to fly, even though statistically it's incredibly safe. Then there's anchoring. Our estimates get swayed by completely irrelevant numbers. It's why an artificially high original price tricks us into thinking a sale is an absolute steal. Representativeness causes us to rely heavily on stereotypes, totally violating basic probability. And the planning fallacy? Oh, that's the optimistic bias explaining why your kitchen remodel will almost certainly cost double your budget and take twice as long as you expect. But perhaps the most pervasive and dangerous glitch of the whole shebang is something Kahneman calls WYSITA, an acronym for what you see is all there is. Here's how it works. When you face a really difficult or ambiguous question, your System 1 silently and unconsciously swaps it out for an easier question. It then builds a coherent, highly believable story using only the limited info it has immediately available. And the really dangerous part? It completely suppresses doubt and ignores the vast amount of evidence it's missing. This glitch is what gives us this massive, completely unjustified feeling of confidence in our snap judgments. Act 3. The economic revolution. So, how did two psychologists use these cognitive glitches to overthrow the entire field of economics? Well, Kahneman and Tversky realized that if humans are constantly glitching and relying on these System 1 heuristics, then standard economic models, which assume we're these perfectly rational calculators of expected utility, are fundamentally flawed. To fix this massive blind spot, they created prospect theory. The beating heart of this theory is the S-shaped value function. Before this, economists thought we evaluated choices based on our total absolute wealth. But this curve proves that we actually evaluate outcomes based on changes from a reference point, usually the status quo. Notice how the shape of the curve changes abruptly right at that center 0 point. The curve for losses drops down much steeper and much faster than the curve for gains goes up. That steep drop right at the reference point represents the legendary concept of loss aversion. Mathematically, researchers have measured this and found that the psychological pain of losing money is roughly 1.5 to 2.5 times as intense as the joy of gaining that exact same amount. Think about that for a second. In human terms, losing $100 hurts way, way more than finding $100 feels good. We are biologically and psychologically hardwired to defend against loss. And this exact dynamic explains why our behavior absolutely baffles traditional economists. Because of loss aversion and the way our System 1 misjudges probabilities, we fall into what's called a fourfold pattern. We act totally risk-averse when we have a sure gain, like we'll take a lesser, safe bet just to lock in a profit. But when we face a sure loss, we suddenly become massive risk seekers. That's why people hold on to losing investments way too long, just praying they bounce back. Plus, because our System 1 mentally overweights tiny percentages, we'll happily go buy lottery tickets for a microscopic chance to win, while simultaneously buying expensive insurance to protect against an equally microscopic chance of disaster. So, the crucial point here is recognizing the stark difference between theoretical econs and real humans. An econ looks purely at absolute data and maximizes utility. They're totally immune to how choices are presented. But a human? Oh, we are deeply manipulated by framing. Look, if a doctor tells you a medical procedure has a 95% survival rate, your System 1 feels reassured and positive. If they say it has a 5% mortality rate, your System 1 immediately hits the panic button. It's literally the exact same statistical fact, but simply changing the frame completely alters our emotional response and ultimately our choice. Act 4, Mastering Your Mind's Mechanics. Now, while some early social psychology studies have faced modern scrutiny, Kahneman's core economic discoveries on System 1 and loss aversion remain absolutely bulletproof. So how do we actually apply them to our lives? How do we actively defend ourselves in this lifelong cognitive duel? First things first, accept reality. You cannot delete your biases or completely rewire your fast automatic System 1. It's just impossible. Instead, you have to design better environments for yourself, what behavioral economists call choice architecture. Set up smart defaults so the lazy choice is automatically the right choice. Treat your goals as reference points so that failing to reach them triggers your loss aversion, which then drives you to work harder. And most importantly, learn to recognize when a decision is truly high stakes and deliberately force your lazy System 2 to wake up, slow down, and actually analyze the facts. Knowing how the machine works is half the battle. You are now fully aware of the invisible fight club happening inside your head. You know that what you see is almost never all there is, and you know for a fact that your brain hates losing significantly more than it loves winning. So, my final challenge to you is this. Now that you know your brain's secret mechanics, how are you going to design your next big decision? Don't let System 1 run the show unchecked. Wake up your System 2, take the wheel, and make a truly calculated choice. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.